Welcome back. Now, it's been a busy and interesting start to the year with the global politics making, for good watching and reading taking center stage. And that's from South Africa assuming the annual rotational presidency and how this will impact South Africa's relations with other countries such as the United States. To the South African incoming ambassador to the United States, Ibrahim Rasool, returning to a country that has significant foreign policy shifts with the African continent. And to take a look at what all of this means more broadly for the year ahead and what's to come during the presidency of Donald Trump, we take a look at what's in store geopolitically, more widely speaking as well, and some of the stories making international headlines. And I'm joined by SABC News United States correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. So this has become an annual thing when you come home and we catch up.
And I won't say, Sakina, that I need you to protect myself from yourself.
It won't be necessary. Sherwin, great to have you. But boy, what a time we're living in.
What a time we're living in, because Donald Trump's return to the United States presidency, Donald Trump 2.0, is already indicating what we might see over the next 4 years. He gave a sweeping and broadly measured press conference yesterday, threatening to change the Gulf of Mexico's name to the Gulf of America. He's threatened Denmark, a co-NATO member state, over its control of Greenland, citing U.S. economic concerns. He has threatened Panama over control of the Panama Canal, saying that they will not rule out military action to reassert American authority over the canal that was ceded to Panama in a treaty signed by the late U.S. President Jimmy Carter in the late 1970s, and has also threatened their closest ally, Canada, threatening economic sanctions to include Canada as the 51st state of the United States. So we're off to the races, Sakina, and it's certainly not portending well for the chaos that will surround this presidency, given the statements coming out from the incoming 47th president of the United States.
Well, if you listen to that media briefing yesterday, it was very chaotic. It's just in terms of what was said. You know, at some point you looked at the journalists' faces and they were somewhat flabbergasted as well. I remember sitting there and thinking, did I just hear what I think I heard? Rewind, and yes, he said it.
Well, I think the question for a lot of journalists in those moments, and we saw that in Donald Trump's first term, is, are you serious? You know, there are real implications about what he's saying here. He's the incoming president of the United States, so when he speaks, you have to. It's incumbent on us to take what he says seriously. But what we have also seen in Donald Trump's first term, and since rerunning for president against Joe Biden and then Kamala Harris, is that he tends to lean on the hyperbolic. He tends to exaggerate. He tends to shoot from the hip. So there is a level of circumspection and gatekeeping that is incumbent on us as journalists to go, you know, to explain why this might or might not happen. Canada is a member state of the United Nations. This, in some way, would probably violate the UN Charter, right? He's not invading, but he's certainly threatening the sovereignty of a UN member state, and that is sacrosanct in terms of the UN Charter. So does this even mean it'll happen? I don't know, but he said it.
And how he said it, you know, he spoke about, for example, buying icebreakers and how the United States does not need Canada to do that. And he takes it further by saying, we don't need Canada. You know, in fact, they should be a state.
Yeah, they have a huge, I mean, I think it's one of the largest trading partners that the United States has in terms of the relationship with Canada. The car industry in the United States is supported holistically by imports from Canada. There are various agricultural trading. I mean, they're part of a free trade agreement with Mexico and the United States, which was renegotiated under Trump's first term. So for him to come back after, you know, they replaced NAFTA with this new agreement between the three states, to now again be talking about imposing tariffs against Mexico, imposing tariffs against Canada, imposing tariffs on Europe, imposing tariffs on BRICS countries, including South Africa. This is where we are today. And so a lot of concern, I think, from the international community on how to navigate this process, right? You talk about icebreakers. What about those what about those icebergs that we are going to have to navigate in this context?
So you touch on Canada and you touch on, some of the African situations, our very own as South Africa, with AGOA, for example, Ibrahim Rasool returning to Washington. But let's talk to those two, because starting with Canada, simply because of Justin Trudeau's resignation. Right. And, you know, if you're Canadian and you're sitting there listening to Donald Trump, in terms of the policies, but listening to what the man is saying, should Canada feel threatened at this point?
I believe so, but Justin Trudeau, the outgoing Prime Minister, has said there was no snowball's chance in hell that Canada would become the 51st state of the United States. They are now going in transition. Donald Trump has pounced. They now need a new Prime Minister to assert Canadian authority in this conversation. But I think what it does tell us in the South African context, and Ambassador Rasool now emerging again as South Africa's ambassador there, he has his work cut out for him. Because Canada is a close ally of the United States, South Africa less so. And do not forget that last year, the Republican majority in the House of Representatives passed legislation seeking to review the bilateral relationship between the United States and South Africa based on South Africa's posture in relation to Russia, China, and Iran, and the broader BRICS conversation. And so here's what Ibrahim Rasool is going to have to navigate. The incoming chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the Senator of Idaho, a guy called Jim Risch, introduced legislation in 2023 seeking to remove South Africa as the host of the AGOA Forum, which eventually went ahead because this was not taken up by the Democratic-led Senate and the Democratic-led White House, right? But Congress also passed this legislation, the House, that was also not taken up by the Senate and the White House. That has all changed now. Republicans have control of the House, they have control of the Senate, and they have control of the White House. Does that legislation then, is that legislation resurrected in the new Congress? That seems very likely. A lot of Republican lawmakers have South Africa in their sights. And so these are some of the elements and the context that Ibrahim Rasool is now walking into. He was ambassador from 2010 to 2015 under the Obama administration. It's a new game in town in Washington. Coming up on January 20th when Donald Trump is sworn in as the 47th president of the United States.
And it's going to be very interesting because, you know, as you say, Trump known for his populist rhetoric, but then with the Republicans taking control of both the houses, the question is, you know, where's that line between the populist rhetoric and actually taking this to action? And
also, you know, if we closely examine the posture that you are hearing from the Republican leaders, particularly the new incoming Republican Senate Majority Leader, a gentleman called John Thune, they are wanting to sanction the International Criminal Court. They do not like South Africa taking Israel to the International Court of Justice, citing genocide violations. So South Africa really has a lot of incoming fire that it's going to navigate, right? Park Stow, the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, his predecessor, Ibrahim Patel. You've seen Ronald Lamola, the International Relations Minister, making these journeys to Washington, D.C. to navigate the trade relationship as it pertains to AGOA. There's new leadership now in D.C., so they're going to have to restart those conversations because AGOA is coming up for renewal in 2025, and whether South Africa will retain its preferential status remains an open question. In addition to that, Donald Trump coming in is going to undermine multilateralism as he sought to do in his first term. He exited the Paris Climate Change Agreement, withdrew America from UNESCO, withdrew from the Human Rights Council. So what does that mean for South Africa's role in the multilateral fora called the G20, which South Africa now presides over? What will Donald Trump do in terms of what South Africa seems to achieve in terms of what's the theme, right? Solidarity, equality, and sustainability. That speaks to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Donald Trump is saying, drill, baby, drill. That's going to undermine what we are trying to achieve in terms of climate mitigation. So these are very tricky, choppy waters for South Africa to navigate as it now, you know, takes the helm of the G20.
Yeah, very interesting what he had to say about the wind farms and, of course, the
wind
drilling.
Farms, the renewable energy future that the United Nations and the world has subscribed to. He is now seeking to undermine those platforms. And so, yeah,
here we go again. He wasn't mincing his words in that regard yesterday. But also, speaking of Israel, he spoke about how he expects a deal in place before his inauguration, and how all hell will break out if the hostages, the Israeli hostages, are not returned.
I think if you speak to Palestinians in Gaza, they will have told you a long time ago that hell broke out a long time ago. In fact, the United Nations Secretary General has said it's a living hell in Gaza. So I don't know how much more hell the Palestinians can sustain. But this is, you know, more in the vein of Donald Trump's rhetoric. He has also been clear that he doesn't want America to engage in wars. He has also taken positions aligned with South Africa in terms of NATO expansion vis-a-vis Russia and Ukraine. So we don't know really what Donald Trump's position is going to be until he acts on those positions. Otherwise, as we've seen with, Canada is going to become the 51st state. We're going to use military action against Denmark. That might just be bluster. This might be bluster. The deal has been in the works since June last year. The UN Security Council, in terms of that ceasefire deal in Gaza, affirmed the Biden plan. The Biden plan has not come to fruition. They're working hard to get it done before Biden leaves office, but he's got a few days left. It seems unlikely that will be achieved right now, unless he, of course, as you mentioned, gets the support of the Trump administration. But this is not going to be a U.S. decision. This is a decision between Hamas and Israel. And unfortunately, those two groups have not been able to see eye to eye on any path forward to a political off-ramp here.
And Sherwin, there's so much going on. Social issues, his views on, abortion, on LGBTQI, community. There's so much going on around Trump and the policies that, are likely to be impacted as a result of another Trump presidency. So where should we focus? Because I think at this point, everybody is quite, again, flabbergasted at what he is saying. But how much of that will really find expression in one term of office?
Let me tell you where you have to focus. There is a blueprint for humanity called the Sustainable Development Goals that was adopted by UN member states in 2015. It talks about no poverty. It talks about no food insecurity. It talks about quality healthcare, quality education, women's empowerment and equality, water and sanitation, climate action, and the list goes on, strong institutions and governance. That's the blueprint we all have to focus on, despite Donald Trump. Yes, he will create headwinds, but addressing poverty doesn't change. Addressing the fundamentals of a sustainable future does not change. And I think that's what you're going to see South Africa push for, given its leadership in the G20 right now.
And the UN, for example, during his previous term in office, Donald Trump was quite clear about the funding that the United States was giving to the UN and not happy about the status quo. So again, where does this leave that? And also talk about a reform of the United Nations, so to speak.
I mean, talk about a red herring, right? I mean, what the United States spends on an annual defense bill is probably almost double the GDP of South Africa. What it gives to the United Nations in its annual remittance is, I don't know, $2-3 billion. Yes, it's the most of any member state because it's based on the size of a country's economy, but it's really small numbers you're talking about in terms of how big the United States economy is. So the UN is always going to be a target. Why? Because the UN tends to take decisions that don't favor the US's closest ally in the in the Middle East, Israel, and so they feel that Israel is unfairly targeted by UN member states, and so you're going to see a great tension between multilateralism and the incoming U.S. administration.
15 seconds. Jimmy Carter, he will be laid to rest tomorrow against this backdrop of a Donald Trump already.
I think you're going to see two visions of America. But Joe Biden will eulogize the 39th president, his casket arriving amidst the pomp and ceremony of a state funeral in Washington. The last time we saw that was in 2018 for George H.W. Bush. And I think you're going to see two different narratives. Joe Biden will speak, and don't underestimate the nuance of this happening just before the inauguration. But of course, then Donald Trump will reassert himself come January 20th. Sakina.
I tell you, Sherwin Bryce-Pease will be bringing us all of that live and direct.